In the meantime, I just request everyone else to put their microphone on mute. And yes, Vishwajit, we have gone live on YouTube. So I'll also share the link on chat here also, ताकि आप वहाँ से देख सकें. In a moment.
Neeraj, on behalf of Department of Business Management of our university, I heartily welcome you for this session. And Neeraj is a well-known econometrician of the country, and his book on fundamentals of econometrics is very popular among the students of economics. And I'm sure you would get a lot of insight from his lecture, and it is going to be really a motivated lecture. I know Neeraj since last so many years, I think right from after joining the department, and I know him so well, and I'm very happy that in spite of his busy schedule, he has accepted our invitation, because many colleges, institutions, universities, they are inviting him. The kind of work he is doing is really, really remarkable. So Neeraj, I'm thankful to you for accepting this invitation, and I request Ashmat to introduce formally Dr. Neeraj Hatikar, and then we will go ahead.
Yes, sure. So there we go. Very good morning to all of those who have joined us right now. And of course, we are expecting many more people to join. So again, a very good morning and a warm welcome to everyone who has joined. And for this session today that we have by Dr. Neeraj Hatikar sir from Mumbai University, and where he will be speaking about tracking the COVID infections in India. And so with the onset of lockdown 4.0 and number of cases in India rising to confirmed cases almost 1.4 lakhs and even more, and with more than 4,000 plus deaths as of today, almost every individual is preoccupied with a single thought, as till when, kab tak ye chalega. So today we have just the right person to provide answers in a sense to many such questions and the patterns that may arise in times to come. Dr. Neeraj with Pallavi Belhekar ma'am and team undertook a study titled The End is Near, Corona Stabilizing in Most Indian States. So which estimated when each state will stop reporting new cases, and said as many as 11 states will reach this goal by 7th of May. And India as a whole will do so by 21st of May. So they examined the slowing of the doubling rate in many regions to arrive at certain projections and generated forecast for the date on which the incidence of new cases will stop using the logistic curve for each state. Now they studied infection patterns in countries like Australia and China, and also the manner of multiplication of virus plus other data. Dr. Neeraj Hatikar sir is a professor of econometrics at Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy, and has guided 11 PhD students so far, and enjoys a cult status in Mumbai University. And he has won 2 fellowships from UK's Cambridge University and has published several academic papers. And a graduate from Pune University, he with a MA and PhD from Mumbai University. He's a prolific writer and has contributed to many peer-reviewed academic journals and the Economic and Political Weekly. You'll find a large number of articles. And he's involved in community work through NGOs, authored a book titled Principles of Econometrics using R by Sage Publications, has contributed to institutional development in his capacity as a coordinator, member of projects, teams, and councils, and as a consultant to several corporates on data analysis and behavioral modeling, and has won national and international awards. So he's also headed Department of Economics of Mumbai University, and with his major areas of interest being economic history of India, applied econometrics. Dr. Neeraj is an academician in its truest sense. So we are honored and grateful to have you, sir. Thank you so much for taking time for this. and we are really hoping for a wonderful session ahead. So the session is over to you, but just before starting, a slight guideline I would like to give to all of the people who have joined us is that I request every one of you to mute your audio so that the audio of the speaker is very much clear. And also, I request to send your questions through chat box only. No, please don't unmute yourself and ask. We'll get it from there. And another thing is, we are live on YouTube, so you can share the link and other people can join from there also. And the session goes like 45 to 55 minutes, something for the speaker, and then rest for the Q&A. So yes, sir. Over to you now. Just give me cues when to change the slide.
So thank you, Ashmat. All of us are in times today which we would probably never anticipated a couple of months ago. At the beginning of March, I don't think any of us could have anticipated that we would all be sitting at home about 2 months' time. The city and the nation would be locked down, stopped, the railways would have been filled for about 1.5 months, no traffic on the roads, no airplanes in the skies, right? So it was a it's a very unusual time, kind of never have anticipated. And therefore, everybody is concerned about what the situation is and how.
Neeraj, can you make your audio more sharpened?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
If you can, then use headphones. If you can use headphones, so that will be much of a.
I'll do that. Yeah, so I will. I will do that.
Yeah, that is going to be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All of us are in very unanticipated, very unusual, very strange times that most of us understand. And because this virus is new, it's unprecedented, we have also no way of making sense of what it's going to do and how things are going to evolve. Many predictions and forecasts using epidemiological models have gone wrong. Hello?
So
Hello, have gone completely off track. For example, at the beginning of March, there were these forecasts from the Center for Disease Dynamics and Economic Policy, which said that by the beginning of May, you would probably have 2 crore cases in Maharashtra alone and 2 lakh people hospitalized. And those kind of things have not happened. Our forecasts also went wrong because at the beginning of during the middle of April, the infection still seemed to be benign, and several states were actually slowly kind of looking like plateauing out. But suddenly things changed trajectory sometimes in April, end of April, beginning of May, and now we have a different regime for COVID. So we don't understand this. So we need to. So basically. What I'll try to do today is to try and make sense of what the situation around us is, and how can you actually develop methods to keep on understanding the situation as it goes on. So I'm not going to talk like epidemiologists. Epidemiologists have a slightly different way of dealing with the situation. What the epidemiologists would typically do is they use these models called which are generally the SIR kind of models: susceptible, infective, recovered, or susceptible, infective, exposed, or recovered. So basically what they say is that at any point of time, the population can be divided into these 3 or 4 compartments: people who are susceptible, people who are infected, people who are recovered. And then there are certain equations of motion. There are certain rules for how these individual proportions evolve. And then they sort of give on the basis of certain parameters which dictate how the time paths of the susceptible, infected, and recovered populations would go. They try and make projections of how many people will be infected at what point of time, how many will be recovered. While they're all useful for managing case loads and all those kinds of things, very often what happens is people respond to these projections. For example, if you're told that 2 crore people in Maharashtra are going to be infected because of virus, and obviously the government take preventive measures. People start taking preventive measures, and therefore the virus actually doesn't spread as much. So those forecasts therefore sometimes build in the behavioral kind of a thing, and a lot of unpredictable things which could not have been forecast at the beginning of the modeling period happen. For example, nobody could have forecasted the kind of pressure that got built up with migrant workers being locked in their homes and then putting pressure on the government and then wanting to go back, which has changed the dynamics of the disease in the country quite a lot. So what we try to do is, rather than make these predictions, projections into the future, which you can't really, we will look at the situation. It's like, commenting on a cricket match ball by ball. So as a given the state of a cricket match at a particular point of time, so 35th over, a good commentator can say maybe what the next ball or the ball after that will happen. Maybe the bowler is very likely to bowl a bouncer at this point of time, and therefore try to make sense of what the match situation at that point is, rather than saying what's going to happen in the 50th over and the 48th over, right? Because things keep on changing so dynamically. So therefore, our methods are more statistical, standard econometric methods of looking at how situations are emerging and making sense of those situations, and then trying to sort of make very, very basic claims about how things will look like in a couple of days' time to come. So can I have the next slide, Ashwin?
Sure.
Yeah, so this is a quick slide I want you to look at. This basically is 5 countries where the infections have come to an end. So countries like South Korea, China, Australia. And you see that what you have is the path of the cumulative number of cases, the total number of infections at any point of time. On the y-axis, you have the total number of infections at any point of time. On the x-axis, you have time. And you see that the infections follow a kind of an S-shaped curve, a logistic kind of a distribution. Why is that so? So think of a lake, and suppose in that lake there's a lot of food, and if you introduce no fish, now if you introduce some fish in that lake, initially the fish population will not grow very fast. But then beyond, when the fish population reaches a critical size, the fish will start expanding very fast. Fish population will grow very fast because there's a lot of food. Ultimately, as the population keeps on increasing, the pressure on the food will increase, and the population growth rate will keep on declining till some point comes where population can no longer grow. So it will kind of become an S-shaped kind of a curve. So we think of the COVID models in the COVID growth of COVID infection in a country just like that. Initially you have cases growing slowly, then there is a period when cases grow very fast. That's the exponential growth period. And then slowly the growth tapers off till finally it stabilizes. And in the middle of April, we were actually seeing states like Himachal Pradesh, states like Kerala, states like Punjab actually reaching this tapering out period till things change quite a lot. So can I go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question that we're going to ask here is, what's the first question that we'll ask is, all of us have been sitting through this lockdown, and this lockdown has obviously impacted life significantly, has created huge economic costs. We don't know what the benefits are. Recently, the secretary to the government of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation said that had we not imposed the lockdown, we would have had about 60 or 70 lakh infections and 50 to 70,000 deaths. This, they said, was done with combination with a study of Boston Consulting Group and ISI Delhi, etc. So let's try to see how does one make sense of these kinds of statements. Next slide. So what we do is we use Google mobility data for it. Look here, our lockdown is called the world's strictest lockdown. Why? Because it imposed certain rules, right? For example, if you look at the COVID response tracker of the Oxford University, then it said that it ranks India's response at 100 because we put in place measures which were very strict. Now, there is a difference between, so the COVID, the Oxford University Index does not tell you how strictly these were actually implemented. It tells you how strict they are. For example, we can have very strict laws against murder, right? But of course, it does not mean that every single murderer in this country is immediately tried rapidly under those laws and punished, right? So actual implementation can be different. So how do we study? And what really matters is what the actual implementation is. So how do we look at actual implementation? How to study actual implementation? So we look at basically Google as in the times of COVID has very kindly agreed to provide what is called Google mobility reports. This tells you how Google devices have been moving. So people who have smartphones, how have their devices been moving to various locations. And what they do is they basically have 6 different types of locations. So they have a certain definition of movement to parks and public spaces, movements to grocery and retail, movements to workplaces, movement to transit stations, then workplaces and people staying at home. So basically, it's also studies how much time is spent at home, right? This is done. So basically, what Google did was it has a period between January to February, a 5-week period, in which it standardizes for every day of the week. So all the data in the future is given as all the data on all the future Mondays, for example, from February till date, will be given in relation to a Monday in the base period. Similarly for Tuesday, similarly for Wednesday, similarly for Thursday, etc. So you can make day-to-day comparisons of this data. But still, those data are useful for studying how actual mobility is happening, how actual devices are moving as against what the rules there are. So when we do that, we see, for example, what we have here is Andhra Pradesh, right? So we basically see that immediately after the lockdown, which is sometimes in the middle of March, you see that mobility has dropped quite a lot, right? Okay, so for example, the blue dots, which are, the purple dots, which are movement to workplaces. So what we did was in this result, we have provided data, the results on Andhra Pradesh for typical for Wednesdays, Sundays, Wednesdays, and Friday. So look at Wednesday, the middle of the week. You see, for example, that many more people are staying at home. The orange dots are on top, residential. There's much more time is being spent at home. There's, of course, a 20-30% increase in the time spent at home, right? Of course, because people spend a lot of time at home, the potential for increase in the actual time spent at home is limited. So, but you have 30% increase in the time spent at home. You have a big drop in the amount of time spent in groceries, people going to parks, retail, transit, workplaces. Those dots can be seen from. But what you also see is, as time progresses, after April, there has been an upward movement. So people have started going a little bit more to grocery shops, started a little bit more to workplaces, started movements to parks, except retail and restaurant, which are closed by law. All other movements have slowly started to take place in Andhra Pradesh. So next slide. Next slide, Ashmit. Can I have
yes,
Ashmit?
Yeah, Assam.
Yeah, Assam. Now, you see, in Assam, the situation is many more people are going to parks on Friday, right? Mobility to parks has been higher than in Andhra Pradesh. Mobility to transit also has been higher, right? If you go to the next slide. Yeah. So if you look at Bihar, you see a lot more mobility in Bihar, right? There are many more people going to parks to work. If you look at Friday, for example, even retail is increasing a little bit, right? There has been an increase in transit, but for parks and grocery, you almost gone back to the levels pre-lockdown levels at the end of at the beginning of May. Can I go to the next slide? If you look at Chandigarh, Chandigarh has one of the strictest lockdowns in the country. You see, suddenly you see the drop after April, after March, and everybody is staying at home. There hasn't been much upward movement. Whatever has been relatively limited compared to a lot of other states. So people are going to groceries, for example, a little bit more transit, but very, very limited way. And non-essentials like parks, etc. The green dots are all at the bottom. Green and the red dots haven't moved too much, right? So Chandigarh has had a very strict kind of a lockdown. Can I go to the next slide? Delhi too has had, a relatively strict lockdown, as you can see from this graph. Can I see the next slide?
Jammu.
See, Jammu and Kashmir, we will leave it out because I think it's an interesting slide. The reason I included it in the data is because Jammu and Kashmir actually had very few devices operating in January and February. So clearly the number of devices now that we have is a lot more, and we'll really not take Jammu. So Jammu and Kashmir should not be taken into consideration. Can I see the next slide?
Yes, sir, it's coming.
Yeah.
Kerala.
Yeah, now Kerala is interesting. You see, Kerala doesn't seem to have had a lockdown, very strict lockdown at all compared to states like Delhi. But Kerala has had a much lower caseload compared to Delhi, for example. So this is strange because Kerala's lockdown was nowhere as strict as that of Delhi, but Kerala's performance in terms of controlling the COVID infection has been higher. Can I go to the next slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Similarly, Karnataka. Karnataka, there has been a little bit more movement. Karnataka, there has been a little bit more movement. And the lockdown has been relatively lax in Karnataka compared to Delhi, but has been stringent compared to, say, places like Bihar. Again, next slide, Ashwat.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's coming. It's a time lag, na? That's why.
Right. And you can see around Maharashtra, the lockdown has been relatively more strict but slowly people have started to move towards, especially groceries, right? But groceries is essential. So the kind of movement to parks and other things that we saw in Bihar or Assam hasn't happened in Maharashtra, but Maharashtra's lockdown has not been as strict as that of Chandigarh as well, right? Okay. So can I go on to next? Yeah. So again, Uttar Pradesh, you see a similar kind of a thing. Can I go on to the next slide? Yeah, so what we realized was that the kind of mobility that actually the strictness with which the lockdown was imposed in different states was actually quite different. So the world's strictest lockdown has not been equally strict for all states. So what we did was we created an immobility index from this data, which basically measures how strict the lockdown was. So 0 immobility means the laxest lockdown. 1 immobility means the strictest lockdown, right, where the immobility has been the least. And what we find here was that Chandigarh, as we said, has the highest possible immobility index. Chandigarh has had a very, very strict lockdown. But the Bihar, which is next to it, has the most lax lockdown, so where the index is 0. And you see a lot of variability in the indices. For example, Himachal Pradesh had a very little impact on very little immobility. Kerala had very little immobility. Maharashtra has actually been a relatively strict lockdown. Right? Delhi has a relatively strict lockdown. So interestingly, what we find is, how does one correlate these? So we try to correlate these with the, so the idea is, if you have a very strict lockdown, so what we see from here is that the extent of lockdown in terms of reducing mobility has been different in different states, different across different states. So we tried to see what is the relationship between mobility like this and the growth of the virus. Ideally, you would expect stronger immobility or stronger lockdowns to actually have lower infection growth, right? Because the idea is to check infection growth, right? To check people from meeting each other and so on. So the infection growth rate should be smaller. So what we tried to do is try to see this correlation, and we found that only a weak negative correlation. So states with higher immobility do actually have lower infection rate growth, but that relationship is very mild. So if you, for example, do a regression of the immobility, of the immobility as a dependent variable and the rate of infection growth as an dependent variable, we find a negative coefficient, but which is not statistically significant. And we find a very small adjusted R-square about 4%, right? So which means that there's a lot more to the story, right? It's not only mobility which necessarily alone drives down infection growth, but there are a lot of other things like testing that states are doing. For example, Kerala had a different strategy of contact tracing, quarantine, and so on, right? So basically, there is a lot more apart from the lockdown which goes into explaining how successful a state has been. So the story that what we would like to say here is that given that the benefits of a lockdown in terms of reducing infectivity growth are rather counterfactual and indirect and context specific. But the costs of the lockdown are very concrete, very clear. Very clear, right? Okay. So basically, with that, of course, we need to look more at a more granular level. So we are looking at now Facebook, data for good. So basically, we are looking at how Facebook provides data on how at the city level and the granular level, devices have moved. So we are trying to look at that kind of a data and try to correlate at a much more granular level about relationships between infectivity, people meeting each other, Facebook contacts, and so on, people's networks, and then see how what kind of a thing that we get. But currently, the relationship between mobility and infectivity growth is not as direct as what the Secretary of the Ministry of Central Program Implementation has said about about infectivity growth and how many lives could have been saved and so on, right? Okay, how many lives could have been saved? We need more research into that area. 000. We need to have more research into that area. Can I have the next slide, Asmat?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. 0. Yeah. So now, but we still want to look at how the curve has flattened. The question is, I don't want to comment on whether it's the lockdown which has led to the curve flattening, but of course, lockdown has been there. And when we look at the curve flattening, we need to keep in the mind the context that there was a lockdown. So what we are now studying is how actually the curves have moved over the days in various states in the country, and how does one gauge the development of the COVID infection. Can I go to the next slide? So if you have here, for example, what we have here is Andhra Pradesh. The first panel is on the y-axis. You have the logarithm of the cumulative cases. On the x-axis, you have dates, right? The two black lines are the lines where lockdown 1 began and lockdown 2 began and lockdown 3 began. Unfortunately, for a majority of states, we can't do a pre and a post for lockdown 1, because when lockdown 1 began, many states did not have even a single case on March 25th. So we can look at how lockdown 2 and pre and post for lockdown 2 and lockdown 3 and subsequently. Now, of course, lockdown 4. The dotted black line that you see gives you what the growth rate of the infections was at the beginning of lockdown 2 on 14th of April. And beginning of lockdown 2 on 14th of April, what the growth rate of infections was. Now, the point is, look at the red curve carefully. Red curve. The thickness of the red curve corresponds to the number of cases. So as the number of cases increases in the state, the curve becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. Now, if you have to draw a tangent to the red curve at any point of time, right, the slope of that tangent would give you the growth rate at that particular point of time. So we can clearly see for Andhra Pradesh that from April 14, second lockdown, the growth rate, the curve has flattened. The curve has definitely flattened. The slope is flatter and flatter and flatter, though there is no evidence to say that has flattened because of the lockdown, because we have seen that mobility, the relationship between locking down mobility and infection growth is rather limited, indirect at this moment. But something has happened, and we need to know what has happened. We need to tell a more complex story. But definitely, the curve has flattened. If you look at the middle panel, that's the new cases coming in. So you have a lot of new cases coming in, up to 70 or 80, and the new cases are coming. It's pure new cases are coming in now. So in Maharashtra, we are worried, for example, that we are having not only a lot of new cases, but more and more new cases are coming up. So that phase has been passed in Andhra Pradesh, and the fewer and fewer cases are coming in Andhra Pradesh. In the last line, you have the growth rate of new cases. And you see that the growth rate of new cases also dropped in Andhra Pradesh quite a lot. So it's approaching 0. So the curve seems to be fairly under control in Andhra Pradesh. Can I see the next slide?
Yeah.
Next slide, we have what is called the doubling period. Now, what is the doubling period? It is a time taken for the number of cases to grow from X to 2X. Now, we have a particular methodology for finding out what the doubling period is. How do you do that? See, currently the government says that the doubling period has gone from 5 to 10 days. That's because they're saying that 10 days ago we had 20 cases. Now we have got 40 cases after 10 days. So the doubling period has gone from 5 days to 10 days, right? I think that's a problematic way of looking at it, because you know that even when the cases today are 20 and cases 10 days ago were 10, today's cases could not necessarily have been 20. They could have been 18, 17, 22, 24, and so on. right? Because each day's case is a random variable. It has a probability distribution. So there are different values will be realized with different probabilities. So therefore, the doubling period that we are seeing today is not the actual doubling period, but only an estimate of what the actual doubling period is. And if it got a different value for the death rate to number of cases today, you'd have got a different estimate of the doubling period. So then how do we calculate the actual doubling period? So what we do is we take data, say for Andhra Pradesh, take data from the beginning of time, the first case till today, we get a time series. Then we use a technique called maximum entropy bootstrapping technique, which is developed by Professor H.D. Vinod of the University of Fordham in America, to actually create 1,000 replications of this time series, this whole data set. Now, it's important to remember that if you have data in time, then the time dimension of the data matters. For example, the number of cases today has to be more than the number of cases yesterday. You have to keep in mind that yt comes after yt minus 1, which comes after yt minus 2, and so on. So that time dimension has to be kept in mind, and Professor Vinod's algorithm does that. So for every state, we generate 1,000 replications of the data on cumulative cases every day. From each of these, we say, okay, on the last date, how long did it take us to double? You know, how many days ago where did we have half the case, right? So for each of these 1,000 replications, we get 1,000 estimates of a doubling period every day. Then we take the median value of these 1,000 estimates, right? And that we call the actual doubling period for today. And then because we got 1,000 estimates, we can also say find out from this distribution the lower 2.5% values, the upper 97.5% values, so that 2.5% values are lower than that cutoff, 2.5% values are greater than cutoff. So we can create those confidence intervals also. So you actually see this picture how this estimated doubling period in Andhra Pradesh has been going up, right? Has been going up in time, and you can see the black dotted lines are the confidence interval, right? So basically our methodology is a little bit improved from what the government says. The government doesn't give you confidence intervals because they don't have the equipment to do that. Our figures will therefore also differ a little bit from what the government's figures on the doubling period are, because ours are actually closer to the true value because they are estimated from a process, whereas government's actually just one single estimate, right? So this is how, but having said that, this is how so we do this for every state, every country in the world, every district in the country, every day. Can you see the next slide?
Yes, sir.
So doubling periods are increasing, which says that, you know, it just means that the growth rate is falling. Yeah. Can I go to the next slide?
This one, sir, or there's another one?
The next slide. Next slide.
Yeah, this one.
The one after that, Andhra Pradesh ke baad? Yeah, this is the one. Now this is something which everybody knows. Everybody talks about the R, reproduction number, right? Okay, now there is something called R naught and there is something called an effective reproduction. What's R naught? At the beginning of the epidemic, right? When the epidemic begins, it is a number of people that an initially infected person will eventually infect. So suppose if I have an infection, then it tells me, you know, the R naught at the beginning will tell me how many people will I infect during the entire period of my infection, right? Okay, whereas the R effective number tells you, so as time goes on, more and more people in the society get infected, etc. More and more people have immunity. So the R naught, R effective rate keeps on changing over time. So what we have done is we have found we actually calculate the effective R naught for all these states on a day-to-day basis. Now that's done by using a package called FPS team. Now you've heard Neil Ferguson and Corey. These are the epidemiologists who are actually at the top, at the front range of the research on epidemiology and essentially calculating the epidemiological numbers around the world. And they have developed a package in R called FPS team. R is an open source programming language. There actually are consortium where there are about 50 odd tools for doing epidemiology. So from that, we are using the package FPS team to develop to calculate these daily estimates of R for Andhra Pradesh. R has to ultimately fall and cross 1. So when R falls in less than 1, it means that a single infection is infecting less than 1 people and the infection is under control. Now, having said that, we also understand that there is diversity in R. Sometimes it can happen is that a lot of people in R can be a little bit above 1, but that's because a lot of people actually have R less than 1, but a few people are very, very infectious. So we call them super infected. right? So in that case, even if R is a little bit above 1, if the super infectors can be taken care of, then the infection doesn't really spread, right? But we don't know who the super infectors are, so we can actually, we so that's the next point I think. Can I go on to the next slide? But
Yes,
R
sir.
naught has been falling in Andhra Pradesh, so the infection is definitely coming under control in Andhra Pradesh. So this is what we call the corona worm. This is our own invention. This is our own, patented tool of understanding how infections are going. What's a corona worm? You see, if you are in exponential phase, then what you should expect is you should expect more new cases today compared to new cases yesterday. Right? That ratio must keep on going up. That's the logic of anything which is growing exponentially. For example, if you get 10% DA on your income, if your income is 1,000 rupees today, then next month you will get 1,000 plus 10%, so 1,100 rupees. The month after that, your additional income will be 100 rupees. The month after that, you will get 10% on 1,000 rupees plus 10% on 100 rupees. So you will get 110 rupees. So what you get the month after will be more, right? So therefore, the ratio of what you get tomorrow to what you get next month to what you get today will be greater than 1. Whereas if you're not in exponential phase, it should be less than 1. So this corona worm tells you how this ratio has been evolving over time in Andhra Pradesh. The red dotted line is what you see is 1. So this corona worm should be less than 1. Also, because we're dealing with a ratio, we know that if you have 8 cases today and 10 cases today and 8 cases tomorrow, the ratio is going to be 0.8. Even if you have 800 cases today and tomorrow and 1,000 cases today, the ratio is still going to be 0.8. But you need to account for the fact that in the first case there were 8 cases, second case there were 800 cases. So the thickness of the worm tells you how many cases that you have. For example, Andhra Pradesh, so the idea is to drive this worm down and make it as thin as possible. And you see the worm is rather thin in Andhra Pradesh. It is approaching 1. It is approaching 1, but it starts to fall below 1, right? It's going down below 1. So we are in a sub-exponential phase. If you have 100 cases today and say 75 cases tomorrow, then you'll get 75% of 75 cases tomorrow, and the growth rate will keep on falling. Can I go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So Andhra Pradesh situation seems to be under control. Yeah. Now, if you look at Assam, you see, next slide, yeah. Assam, you see something peculiar. Assam, actually, the growth rate of new infections are virtually flattened before lockdown 2. Up to lockdown 3, the growth rate of infections was reasonably flat. The infections were not growing. But you see, infections have started growing very rapidly after May. So if you draw a tangent, the red curve is becoming thicker and thicker and thicker. And if you draw a tangent to the red curve at any point after May 1, you will see it's steeper than the dotted lines. You actually have a faster growth rate compared to what was happening before April 14. Right, and that's probably because migrants are going back, and we had warned earlier in the paper that once you open up, migrants will go back to villages. Migrants typically come from the poorest districts in the poorest states where there is no infrastructure and to deal with this kind of a crisis. So you might actually make situations, states where the situation under control might actually start to have a problem. If you go to the new cases in Assam, you also see that the more and more new cases are now coming up. The numbers are large, the rate of new cases increased steeply in Assam. And you see the growth rate of new cases in the last panel has also gone up. The growth rate of new cases in the last panel has also gone up for Assam. Can I see the next slide? So look at the doubling period, which was rising, which was very high, which had reached something like 30, and see how the doubling rate has now fallen rapidly after me. Right? So more and more cases are coming up because the rate of growth of cases is increasing. So doubling period has first risen, was very big. Right? The size of the ball tells you how large the doubling period was, and doubling falls and becomes smaller as it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Next slide. The R naught in Assam was also falling. It has been quite close to 1, right? It was not statistically different from 1, but now the R naught has been rising. You see, the R naught in Assam is close to about, now you're getting it more than what you had at the beginning of the infection. Which is not a very good thing because, at the beginning of the infection, you don't have surveillance. You can't test. You don't know whether people are infected. So, which means that, any single individual can infect a lot more people. But as immunity develops in society, an infected individual will infect fewer and fewer people. But so you should see R naught falling, but you know actually see R naught towards the end is actually increasing in Assam. So maybe a second phase of infections now is beginning in Assam, which you have to be very careful about. Next slide, can we go on to? Yeah, I've not done the corona worm for Assam. I've done it only for few states because it's a very computationally intensive exercise. Now, if you look at Bihar, you again see Bihar, the rate of growth has been picking up after May 1. You know, the corona worm becomes, the red line becomes thicker. And if you draw a tangent to that red line, then, you know, it's probably steeper than what you had in the beginning of April, right? You also see that the growth, new cases more and more are coming up, and the growth rate of new cases also picking up in Bihar. So same thing, migrants going back now. Migrants going back is now creating a problem in Bihar, right? Can I see the next slide? So look at the doubling rate in Bihar. The doubling rate in Bihar was increasing till May, then suddenly drops. Right? It's been dropping down all the way, right? Okay, so Bihar again, you need to be careful about. Next slide. You see the R naught in Bihar. The R naught was falling, turned up again after lockdown 1 was lockdown 3 was going, but it's again going up now. So R naught's going up is definitely not a good sign for any state. So those states need to be watching out. Can I see the next slide?
This one?
Yeah, this one. So this is the corona worm for Bihar.
Yeah. Shall I change it?
Yeah. Yeah. Now look at Delhi. Yeah, you look at Delhi. Delhi, you see again the cases have flattened off, right? Between the lockdown 2 and 3, right? So it's not such a large drop, but you can see that slowly things are coming under control. The red line is becoming less and less steep compared to the black dotted line. That is our benchmark, right? You're having things under control if the red line is becoming less and less steep compared to the black line. New cases will keep on coming up, right? And I'm saying that Delhi is coming under control even when the number of new cases is increasing. I'll tell you why when you come to Maharashtra, right? And again, you see the growth rate of new cases has fallen, but again, you see small pickup towards the end. So you need to be careful in that respect, otherwise gains can be lost. Can I go to the next slide? As you can see, the doubling rate in Delhi has been going up, right? Has been going up. The balloon keeps on going up, you know, yeah. So if you actually see the balloon, I think the balloon is moving very slowly. Yeah, the balloon keeps on going up, and a little bit of a flattening out towards the end, which is very important, as we will see later. You can see again, R naught in Delhi has been falling. R naught in Delhi has been falling, but not falling fast enough. Right? R naught in Delhi has been falling, but not falling fast enough. And keep this in mind, we're very similar to what's happening in Maharashtra. The Maharashtra and Delhi experiences look so similar. Can I go on to the next slide? Yeah. Gujarat, you know, has a serious problem. Ahmedabad has been a very major issue. In fact, if you look at the total cases in Mumbai, Pune, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Pune, Ahmedabad, Chennai, and Thane, then they account for more than 50% of the cases in the whole country. So these are important issues. So if you come to Delhi, Delhi is also flattening out, but not as good as Gujarat is at a flattening out, but not as good as a flattening out in Delhi. You see, in fact, it's only after the beginning of lockdown 3 that the rate is flattened out slightly, but between lockdown 2 and 3, Delhi did not, in spite of being severe on the immobility, Delhi's loss of infection, the gain infection wasn't very high, right? You see but you see the new cases now are coming at a fewer and fewer rates, in spite of, at Gujarat. New cases are coming out at a fewer and fewer rates, right? And you also see the growth rate of new cases declining. So Gujarat is also slowly coming under control. Can I see the next slide? Yeah, if you look at this is the corona worm in Delhi, which I by mistake put in this slide. You see the corona worm in Delhi goes up and up, becomes fatter and fatter and fatter, touches one, and then starts to move down. So that shows that Delhi is also now slowly coming under control despite a large number of cases. Next slide. Yeah, the doubling period in Gujarat is now increasing, is becoming bigger and bigger. It's becoming fatter. The ball is becoming bigger, right? And you're reaching around 20 as the doubling period, mainly in Ahmedabad. Next slide. Yeah. This is R0. R0 in Gujarat. R0 in Gujarat was very high during the beginning of lockdown 2 and then has been falling consistently through lockdown 3 and is still going down, approaching 1. So we are again things are slowly coming under control in Gujarat as well. Can you see the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There is a background noise. Somebody's
yeah, I guess anybody, किसी का जो microphone on है, please mute it so that you can hear him much clearer. Please mute yourselves. Just a moment. Yeah, please continue.
So Gujarat, you see the corona worm, right? It had reached 1. As you see, the R0 was high during the second and third lockdown. So the corona worm had reached 1. It was becoming fatter and fatter and fatter. But subsequently, the corona worm has started to move downwards. So again, we have some benefit in, so things are coming under control. Can you see the next slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Haryana has been successful. So you see again, Haryana after the black dotted line, you see that the infection was reasonably under control between lockdown 2 and 3. There has been a little bit of fall off between after lockdown 3. A little, when the red curve has become thicker, and also if you draw a tangent to the red curve, then probably it's still a little bit flat, but you have to be careful, right? If you look at the new cases, more and more new cases are coming up, right? Okay, more and more the rate of growth of new cases increasing, more new cases are coming, right? The number of new cases coming up is large, but the rate of growth is slowly falling off. Next slide. Yeah, if you look at the doubling period here, the doubling period went to seesaw. It first fell, then it rose, then again it fell, then again Haryana, it has been on the rise, right? So we actually have a doubling period around 20 days in Haryana. So it's been a seesaw kind of. Haryana in the middle saw a spike in cases, so doubling rate fell. So, but basically now things seem to be under control. And if you look at the R0 in Haryana, you can see R0 rising when it had new cases, and now R0 has been falling. So again, we have reasonable control despite a few hiccups in Haryana. If you look at Himachal Pradesh, as a classic case. Himachal Pradesh actually seemed quite under control. You see in the beginning, during lockdown 2 and 3, there were no new cases in Himachal Pradesh. So the curve was absolutely, flat. But after lockdown 3, that is May 1 onwards, you see that the curve has become increasingly steeper and steeper and steeper, right? Okay, so probably, and you can also see more and more new cases are coming up in Himachal Pradesh, and growth rate of cases falling. And you see the doubling rate has dropped in Himachal Pradesh quite drastically. That's because migrants are coming back into Himachal Pradesh mostly and carrying infections from cities. Can you see the next slide? Can I see the next slide? Yeah, the R0, as you see, R0 was rising. R0 has actually reached 1, but R0 began to turn up rapidly in Himachal Pradesh as well, right? So Himachal Pradesh, so states like Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, and Assam are worrisome now.
So you have been muted. Yeah, you muted yourself. Yeah, you muted yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
So can you see the next slide?
Yeah.
Jammu. Now you see Jammu again, you have a reasonable control, right? Curves are flattening off. New cases, more and more new cases surely coming, but the rate of growth of new cases has fallen. There's a little bit of uptake at the end, but otherwise there is a significant drop in the rate of growth of new cases. Can you see the next slide? You see now doubling rates, obviously, unfortunately, towards the end, when doubling rates had actually reached 20, that's kind of a national benchmark, doubling rates have started to move down again in Kashmir. You can see that's because of slight increase in the growth rate of cases. And that's because, again, migrants going back most probably to Kashmir. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Next slide. Again, this gives you the daily reproduction numbers uh, in Jammu and Kashmir, and you see daily reproduction numbers are falling, but are not started to move up towards the end, right? In Kashmir. So again, Kashmir is a little bit. You should keep an eye on what's happening in Kashmir as well. You come to Jharkhand. Jharkhand again had very little infections. You see the curves were fairly flat between the second and the third lockdown, but have started to move up after the third lockdown. The growth rate of new cases also risen after the little bit after the new after May 1. So can you see the doubling rate? Next slide. So again, you see the doubling rates were rising in Jharkhand. It kept on rising, but after May, the doubling rate has also fallen in Jharkhand because Jharkhand also receives a lot of in migrants back home now. Yeah, next slide. And the same story is told in Jharkhand by R0. So as R0 was falling in Jharkhand, falling. So Jharkhand things were fairly under control, and that's why we said things would come under control. But towards the end, R0s have started to move up. So can you see next slide? Yeah, Karnataka, you see Karnataka has been held as a poster boy. People have said Karnataka has done rather well, and it did do rather well between the lockdown 2 and 3. But at the end of lockdown 2, beginning of lockdown 3, when there is mobility, Karnataka has seen the pickup in cases, especially in districts like Bellary, which we see where there have been actually people migrating from Gujarat and Maharashtra, poorer districts of Karnataka. So currently, Karnataka government has banned people from Maharashtra going into Karnataka because, as you can see, why? And if you look at the doubling rate in Karnataka also, it had risen. It had reached almost 20, but now it has been falling dramatically, right? So that's why what's happening in Karnataka is also worrisome. Though Karnataka has a good record so far, after May, situation in Karnataka is also probably turning for the worse, and that's because again people going back, right? Can I see the next slide? Next slide, Ashmat, please. Can you hear me? Yeah, next slide. Now, this is Madhya Pradesh, right? Madhya Pradesh, no, Kerala. Kerala has been a poster boy. Yeah, Kerala has been a poster boy. Everybody knows that Kerala was a great success. And you see that Kerala had actually flattened this curve completely even before April 14. And actually at April 14, its rate was actually increasing, right? So basically you have slow flattening out, but Kerala was fairly under control till May. But again, you see Kerala, things are turning up now. So if you draw a tangent to the curve at its latest point, you'll see it's steeper than the dotted line. So maybe the growth rates are increasing compared to April 14, and you can see more and more new cases in Kerala coming up. Growth rates are also rising. You said doubling period in Kerala was huge. It had reached something like 40, right? And then the doubling period after reaching 40 actually drops down like a hockey stick, right? It's dropping down now. So we need to also be careful about what's happening to Kerala. If you look at the reproduction number, right, the reproduction number had almost reached to 1, right? Very close to 1, but now it has also started to rise. So Kerala, again, because these are states which are receiving migrants. You know, Kerala sends a lot of people out for earning a livelihood and gets a lot of remittances and incomes from migrants. So migrants are now coming back. So these may be nurses, people who work in garages, unorganized sector workers, and that's creating a problem. Okay, Madhya Pradesh, you see, reasonable control. Things are flat in Madhya Pradesh, slowly improving situation. The curve is becoming flatter and flatter and flatter. More and more new cases obviously coming up, but the rate of growth is falling. If you look at a doubling period in Madhya Pradesh, as you see, doubling period was increasing in Madhya Pradesh. It had reached something like 20, and you see a small downward movement in the doubling period again as migrants move in. Next slide. You can see R0 in Madhya Pradesh. The R0 is falling, right? It never really reaches 1, but is now slightly up again, right? Okay. Next slide. What's happening in Maharashtra? All of us are worried about Maharashtra. Everybody's worried about Maharashtra because Maharashtra, you see, India is one of the worst affected countries in the world. Maharashtra is one of the worst affected states in the country. And where I am sitting now, Mumbai is one of the worst affected cities in Maharashtra. So in some sense, we are in a global uh, map, right? Okay. So fine. So now, okay. So let's see. Okay. So can you see Maharashtra? Yeah. So again, you see Maharashtra very importantly, you actually have a turn down. So it's not as if the rate of growth in Maharashtra is really exploding. Maharashtra, after April 14, the red curve has become reasonably flatter. So if you draw a tangent to the red curve at any point after May 14, that would be flatter than the dotted line. And so we have actually reduced the rate of growth. Things are slowly becoming better. The rate of new cases, what is worrying everybody? Can I go back to the previous slide, husband? Yeah. What is worrying everybody is because we are now having something like 2,000, 3,000 cases coming up every day. And I'm going to take you through why that's happening, that's to be expected, given the situation. The rate of growth of new cases has dropped, but slowly. And the problem is that if you come to after May 1, then the rate of growth is not really dropping so fast. So the decline has been checked. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah, if you look at the doubling rate in Maharashtra, the doubling rate in Maharashtra has been rising, has been rising, has been rising, right? But it's been rising very slowly, and towards the end, it's actually becoming flattened, right? So the rate of doubling rate has not increased very fast. Next slide. If you look at the R naught in Maharashtra as well, you see R naught was dropping, dropping, dropping. It's still dropping, right? But it's now kind of becoming flat, right? It's not, the gains are not happening. Next slide. So we're not losing, but we're not gaining so something dramatically. The corona worm is interesting in Maharashtra. Can you? So first, for example, it's rather thin, the corona worm, right? Okay, can you play the slide? Yeah, now you see it becomes fatter and fatter and fatter. It reaches 1 and it's around 1. It's becoming thicker and thicker and thicker and moving down, moving closer and close to, closer and closer to 1. So you see what kind of fight is going on in Maharashtra as of now, right? You see the severity of the fight. More and more new cases, but we are just desperately trying to keep the corona worm at 1. The idea is to drive it down and make it thin. It should not become fatter and go up, right? That is the kind of situation that we have. Next slide. Yeah, now why is that happening? So currently what I'm going to show you is some simulation exercise. What are the simulation exercises? So unlike the SIR model, there are also what are called individual contact model. So in this individual contact model, I have a simulation. So I've assumed the population of say X number of people, say 1,000 people. And let's assume that there's a uniform mixing. So everybody in society can meet everybody else randomly, right? Okay. Now, there is a 30% chance that one person meets another person, right? Or one person, we'd say that there are 30 instances of one person meeting another person. So there are 30 interactions. And suppose at each interaction, there's a certain probability of infection transmission. So what we're saying is, if say one infected person meets an uninfected person, non-infected person, then it's not that the non-infected person immediately gets infected. There's only a certain probability that the non-infected person gets infected, right? Okay, and we look at various, so basically how the pandemic will evolve will depend on two things. One, how many interactions happen, and what is the probability of transforming infection from one person to another, transferring infection from one person to another in every single transaction. So the first part is about lockdown. What the lockdown tries to do is to reduce transactions, right? So people don't meet each other. Staying at home essentially is not meeting. So that's the controlling the first part. The second part of minimizing infections from one person to another is taking personal care, maintaining distances between people, wearing masks, right? Wearing gloves, right? Washing your hands regularly, right? Not touching your hands to your eyes and face. All these are methods of minimizing infection transmission. So what we're doing is we're looking at now. If you look at Maharashtra, majority of the cases are in places like Mumbai. Mumbai is a huge. Mumbai is about 60% of the cases of Maharashtra and raging, right? Now, one must remember that the wards in Mumbai which have the highest number of cases, so wards like E, M West, K, H East ward where we live, L ward, Kurla, So if you start from, say, South Central Mumbai, right, that's where Ward E begins, at the Madanpura area. Then if you keep on going northwards till about M eastward till Chembur, Mankud, you actually have a huge contiguous belt of slum settlements. The people live in extremely dense settlements where maintaining distance from each other is a near impossibility. So both controls, minimizing meeting other people cannot happen because you live in very small areas, right? Things are very crowded. Even if you want to walk down the lane, you'll find lots of people sitting outside their homes because their homes are small. Things, the temperature is hot. You can't sit inside. You have to go to the public loo. You'll meet hundreds of people. If you have to go to the public tap, you'll meet hundreds of people. There is no way in which you can avoid interacting people, no matter how much ever personal care you take. So you might wear masks, you might wash your hands regularly, you might not want to touch your eyes. That's one part of the control, but the number of people that you meet is not under your control. So if that happens, the first red curve, the dark red curve which you see, assumes that there are people, an individual gets about 20 exposures a day, and each exposure there's a 20% chance of infection. So if an infected person meets 5 people, then he infects one of them, right? Okay, which is much smaller than the R naughts that we are using. So now, if you have that, you see how the infection goes. The infection rises very steeply, and then falls falls also quickly. And say within about 15-20 days, you actually have the infection coming under control, but a lot of people get infected. And I think that is what is happening in slum areas in Mumbai. And if I were living in the informal sector, if I were a plumber living in informal sector settlement, I would be sure that I would be infected. There's a high chance of me getting infected, and therefore, and I know that getting infected with COVID is not a good thing. There is no medicine. I might die. I also know that because I live in slum areas where there is public infrastructure is very poor. I also have other comorbidities. Then I might decide to go back home. I might be very keen to go back home. I might say that if I stay here, I might very reasonably argue that I'm very likely to get infected, and so I will be desperate to go back home. I'll put pressure on my government to let me go home. If I don't get buses, I will try to pay whatever I can to catch trucks and buses or any mode of conveyance. If I don't even get that, then I would try and walk home, because I know staying here means almost certainly falling ill, given the very high chance of infection that I have, given very high density of settlement. Right? So that's why there is this huge exodus of people wanting to go back. It's not really because people are not getting salaries, right? It's not that that's a compounding factor, right? But it's a huge fear, huge, reasonable, very rational fear of getting infected by a disease which doesn't always have which doesn't have a cure as of now. Like, for example, we have workers in the university who are being paid wages on the regular basis. The university has not stopped their wages. But because we are in a hotbed of infection and they come from Telangana where infections are under control, they actually reasonably want to go back home, even when they're getting wages, because they think by staying here, they're certain to get infected. And that's not unreasonable fear. So if you see 5 at 10, as you come down, so if you come to the bottom, for example, you see if you have say 5 exposures per day, and say if you look at 15 exposures per day and 5% infectivity, and if you come down below and say 5 exposures per day and 10% infectivity, right? So if you're staying in a building, right, then you can reduce your exposures quite a lot, right? So instead of getting 20 people, you just get 5 people. Suppose people's buildings have about 1/4 of the exposures that people in slums have, which is not a realistic number. They're actually much smaller, right? And there's just 5% chance of infection. So because you take a lot of care, right, you can actually maintain social distance and so forth. It then shows that if you're in a housing society or a high-rise building, the last curve, right, you see the curve is very flat, very flat. So not too many people get infected, but the infection lasts for a long time. You see, in the slum area, it's like setting fire to a bale of hay, right? Everything suddenly fire catches up, fire rages, and then the fire is put out because there is no more grass to burn. Whereas in a housing society, it's like setting fire to a damp bale of grass. Burns slowly, 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 low level of. So low level of infectivity will continue in buildings, housing societies, etc., even when the fires in slums. So what I see in the future is that slum fires, the rates of growth, large number of new cases will not come. as large as they are coming now. But there'll be low levels of infectivity in housing societies, and which might come as episodic, as episodes of rise. So suddenly you have these SARS, you suddenly have epidemics of measles, epidemics of tuberculosis, epidemics of dengue. So you similarly have epidemics of COVID, which will not put the kind of pressure on our urban health infrastructure that is currently being put, obviously, right? Okay. The other thing that it has is now a lot of people from the urban informal sector have moved back, right? Will they want to move back into the city? I think they will reasonably conclude. So suppose if I am somebody staying in say Dharavi, and I suppose I work as a taxi driver, then I will of course go back to my village. And if I survive, I will say that okay, in Dharavi there is no more infection, but outside Dharavi there is likely to be a lingering infection. So so if I go there to go, and if I drive my taxi and if there 2% infection outside Dharavi, if I meet 100 people every day, I'll get 2 of them who are infected. So there's a good chance that I might actually get infected with COVID. And unless there is a vaccine, that is too much of a risk. So many people, especially who are risk averse, who have gone back to villages, might not want to come back to the uh, to the to the city. But obviously, because there is scarcity of labor in the city, there are lots of good income opportunities which will not go unused. So people who will now move from rural areas to urban areas will be different largely from people who have gone to the rural areas. The people who will come back now will probably be urban, more younger, more dynamic, more entrepreneurial, more risk-taking kind of people who know that there's risk to be run, but there is also a lot of benefits to be made, right? So they will actually, because they can occupy these business slots which the previous generation has vacated. For example, outside of the university, there is a Kachi Daberi stall, which is very popular, right? They waste a lot of business, but the man has gone away now. And if he doesn't come back, then somebody else will take his place who's willing to take the risk of being infected, but can also actually, see the money that will be there. So a different kind of lot will come now, and the structure of the otherwise sector will therefore be changed. The other thing I predict is a lot of the death rates will increase now, because what's happened is in all the urban, or all the people who could afford to go back have gone back. All those who could afford to pay paid and went away. All those who could not afford to pay but could still walk have gone away. So those who could neither afford to pay nor could afford to walk, it is the old people who are with comorbidities, who are poor or too poor to actually pay those money, that money. That's the kind of people who are left behind. Now, these people are very susceptible to COVID infection. So what might happen is you actually for some time see a spike in the death rates in urban areas, in cities like Mumbai. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah, next slide, please. Rashmi. Yeah, now this is interesting. So what is happening is now one of the things that drives new cases. So how do you find new cases? Because you're testing people and you're finding certain percentage of people who are positive per test, right? So for example, you're finding 5% people are positive per test, and if you conduct 100 tests, then you'll find 5 new cases. Now, what has been happening in Maharashtra is the red line tells you how the number of cases per million has been increasing. Number of tests per million has been increasing. So you see that the tests have increased very fast. The green line tells you what is the proportion of people you're finding infected per test. Now, if the pandemic is spreading, obviously the percentage of the percentage of people you find infected per test must also go up. And that is actually happening in Maharashtra. The green line shows obviously the number of people, the positivity rate for every test is also going up, but the number of tests is going up much faster. Okay, you also see around March 11, you see an increase in the tests which has dropped again, but you see an increase in infectivity which has remained high, right? Why has that happened? Because after March 8 or 10, actually now we are finding, because the relaxation in lockdown, we're finding more people in the community, in non-containment zones. You're finding more cases than you're finding in containment zones, which means that there is some spread of infections now from containment to non-containment zones, which has led to increase in the positivity rate. But what is reassuring in this is that the increased number of cases in Maharashtra is primarily being driven by increased testing rather than increased infect positivity per test. Positivity per test is also increased, but tests have increased at a much faster rate, right? So I think that's something that we should find reassuring. Next slide. I've often asked the following. On the one hand, you're saying that the growth rates of cases are falling, doubling rates are increasing, and then you're also seeing more and more and more cases coming up. So we have something like 2,000 cases that will become 2,500 cases every day. So how do you reconcile the two? Because people are really not so much reassured by increasing doubling rates, but new cases coming to the hospitals becomes alarming, right? And because that puts a lot of load on the hospitals, you get newspaper reports of bodies lying, people waiting outside hospitals, not being admitted, and so on. So new cases becomes very severe. But one must remember that new cases and doubling rates and the essential base rate of cases, how many cases you already have, are all tied together mathematically. So, for example, the doubling period is determined by the growth rate. The doubling period is nothing but the natural log of 2 divided by the growth rate of cases. So if you have a higher growth rate of cases, you have a low doubling rate. If you have a low growth rate of cases, you have a high doubling rate. So now, suppose if you have a doubling rate, if you look at this picture, and if you have a doubling period of something like about 12 days, and if you have something like 50,000, 40,000 cases, right? Okay, so that's the point. If you go up on the horizontal axis, it should tell you. So that should tell you so it means that with 40,000 cases, we have a certain growth rate of new cases, which will necessarily mathematically translate into a certain number of new cases. And what you can see is, if you go on the x-axis, y-axis, you see that about 2,000, if you have a doubling period of about 12 days and already 40,000 cases you have, then you'll actually get something like 2,500 cases per day, right? So that is to be expected, given our doubling rates and the number of cases that we have. And you see, Mumbai number of cases are likely to be large because we have about 1.5 crores people, most of whom are staying, about 60% of whom are staying in very congested slum localities where infections are spreading like crazy. But things will stabilize as fire burns out here. There's not going to be, hell for many, many years to come, right? So basically the number of cases will be large. And if the number of cases are large, suppose you have 60,000 cases, and if your growth rate of new cases just goes down to 1, which means your doubling rate is very high, even then you'll get 600 cases per day, right? So therefore, one must all brace ourselves up for a significant load on the healthcare system primarily. We know that out of this 2,500, maybe about 2% will be the mortality rate, or 1% will be the mortality rate. So you'll get probably 25 deaths per day, right? 25 deaths per day, which is bad. But we have about 13 people dying on Mumbai railways every day, right? Which we have got used to, right? So we'll have about 25 deaths per day, but you might probably have about 250 hospitalizations out of these 2,500 people. The rest of them might be asymptomatic, which can be quarantined at home. So case management will become easier, right? It will not be so large. If you have 2,500 new cases coming every day, you really need to hospitalize. You need 250 new people every day, basically, and you'll get about 25 new deaths every day, right? So that's. Can I see the next graph? Yeah. So next graph says how things will look like in the near future. So I think we are now already 50,000 cross. It's not unrealistic to go on to 80,000 cases. And suppose we can get our doubling rates up to 20, then we'll probably have, more than 1,000 cases still coming up every day, right? So for the next month or so, you must not expect the number of cases coming down to stop completely. Up to something like 1,000 might still be coming up, okay, even if we increase our doubling rate from 13 to 20, and if our cases go on to 80,000, which is quite possible in Maharashtra. And then, but if you have 1,000, then you probably require, out of these 1,000, maybe 100 will need to be hospitalized every day. And you probably get something like 10 deaths every day from COVID infections in the state. But I would say things are under control, right? I would still say things are under control because those numbers are to be expected. As the doubling rate goes up, which means that the growth rate of new cases is falling, which means that the curve is flattening. So just because 1,000 new cases are coming up every day and being reported every day, doesn't mean that the situation is completely out of control. You can have a reasonably situation in control, but still you can get a large number of new cases. That needs to be emphasized because the media is going around saying so many new cases today, right? so many new deaths today, and they keep on giving the reports of people waiting outside hospitals and dying. Look, these things will happen. These things will happen because the case load is huge. We don't have an infrastructure prepared to completely ready to deal with these kinds of things. That's to be expected, right? The lesson to be learned from that is not to panic and throw our hands up, but one, to fight. The fight is going on. It's a tough fight. We are slowly winning. But it's not going to be all rosy. You're going to have these kinds of situations. And we've been through it before. In Mumbai, for example, in 2005 floods, I've seen bodies around where I stay, where we had to actually tie bodies up to trees for a while because there was no way in which any ambulances could reach us. So, so we just had to keep people tied to trees for a while till the floods subsided for a few days, actually. So we have been through all this. We have been through all this and we'll get through all this. Right, so there's no need to really panic as if the end of the world, and unfortunately sometimes that's a kind of a reaction, and then there are knee-jerk reactions by bureaucrats and politicians which makes things even worse. Right, carrying on to the next slide. So I'll quickly take you through. Odisha has been a problem. Odisha, you see again, the growth rates were flattening, but after May 1, growth rates in Odisha have also been starting to rise. You have a pickup in growth rates. Can I see the Odisha? Next slide. Yeah, you see Odisha, you see the doubling period has been continuously going down in Odisha. Right, doubling period has been going down in Odisha. Can I go on to the next slide? R0 in Odisha has also been falling, rising, falling, rising. So it's a kind of a, you see the Odisha you need to worry about. Right? Can I go to the next slide? I'll quickly take you through the remaining presentation. So basically Punjab has been very interesting. See, Punjab has flattened out. There are no new cases coming in Punjab. So more than
So your screen freezed actually. Neeraj sir. Let's see what we can do.
What happened?
Sir, I guess network issue है. उनका screen freeze हो गया है. So थोड़ा network issue होगा. And we still have a large number of questions coming in. I think he'll rejoin. Let's see.
Yeah, I have rejoined.
Yeah, that's
right?
great. That's good. Yeah, please.
So Punjab, for example, Punjab has a lot. In fact, interestingly, everywhere trains are being arranged to send migrants home. In Punjab as well as Haryana, migrants were booked for the Shramik Express trains, are now cancelling their bookings in many places because they realize that things are not as bad. In fact, things could be worse at home than they are in Punjab or Haryana. And the government of Punjab is saying, look here, we have spent a lot of money. In fact, the government of Haryana is saying that, look here, we have spent a lot of money to arrange this train and you guys don't want to go back home now. But which is a good situation. And Punjab and Haryana, I think, are definitely, cases which are, I think, which will be as much of a poster boy for control of COVID as Kerala is. Can I go to the next stage? Yeah, as you see, the doubling period in Punjab has been, especially after the third lockdown, the doubling period in Punjab has been rising, and it is now almost 30. Right, 30 is a huge doubling period. And if you see R0 in Punjab, then if you go to R0 in Punjab is risen when migrants came, but then it has become 1 now. It has touched the green line. Right, so Punjab is definitely under control. Right. Okay, can I go on to the next slide? So the corona worm in Punjab, as you can see, corona worm in Punjab, as you can see, it was rather thin, right? It was rather thin. It continued to be thin and around 0.5, right? Then suddenly when migrants came, it became fat and rose to 1. Then again has become thin and going down. So that's how you want corona worms to go in states like Maharashtra. You see how it is a different kind of fight Maharashtra is fighting, right? Again, you see Rajasthan, after lockdown 3, things are slowly coming under control in Rajasthan. New cases will come in for the logic I explained to you about, but the growth rate of new cases also dropping. Right? Yeah. Can I go on to the next slide? Yeah. So you actually see doubling period Rajasthan also increasing. Right? Doubling period Rajasthan also increasing, as you can see from this graph. Yeah. Okay. And R0 in Rajasthan also falling. R0 in Rajasthan keeps on falling. little bit rise towards the end, right? But that's something that you. Tamil Nadu is another major problem, Chennai especially. But you see, Tamil Nadu was doing fairly well between April 1 to May 1, April 14 to May 1. Then they began testing a lot. There was one single cluster found in Chennai market, which was a huge number. So suddenly things, but again, control seems to have been established in Tamil Nadu. And you see that the rate of increase of new cases falling, the doubling period is increasing, right? In Tamil Nadu, if you look at the doubling period from May, it has been increasing. R0 has also been falling systematically. There was some increase, right? If you look at Telangana, Telangana is also another good situation. No wonder people from who are staying in Mumbai, hot workers who are staying in the hotbed of infection in HE squad in Mumbai want to go back to Telangana, their home place, because in Telangana things are very much under control. Right, the curve has really flattened in Telangana. You see the doubling period in Telangana is about 30. Yeah, it's a huge, just like Kerala, right? It's a big doubling period. You know, R0s are falling. R0 is falling fast, right? If you come to the next stage, Uttar Pradesh also things seem to be under control, except that now with the growth rates have picked up with the migrants coming in. Next slide. So you see doubling periods in Uttar Pradesh were rising, but now doubling periods in Uttar Pradesh have also started to come down slowly with migrants coming back. And Mr. Yogi Adityanath has a huge task at home and on hand. Reproduction numbers have been falling, were falling, again increase. Uttarakhand, you see, was a great state. Uttarakhand was fairly under control. But again, after May, you see Uttarakhand, the curve will become steeper, right? And you see increase in the growth rate of infections. You see that the R0s and also falling, but go to the doubling period of Uttarakhand. Just see the doubling period of Uttarakhand. Next slide. Look at doubling period was large. Okay, it reached 30. So can you go on 30, and then it began to fall so fast. Began to fall so fast. It fell like a stone doubling period. So which is because a lot of migrants are coming back in. Can I see the next slide? Yeah, the daily reproduction numbers have also fallen. They were falling. They were almost 1, but again rose. Okay, West Bengal, from the data that we have, the curve seems to be flattening in West Bengal, right? Rate of new cases also now came to stabilize. The growth rate is falling. Can I see the doubling period in West Bengal? You see the doubling period is also increasing, not as fast as it increased in Kerala, but yes, it's on the upward movement that's reaching around, just like the Maharashtra, and R0 is also falling, right? But towards the end, so basically, what are the things? What are the learnings that we have from this, right? First thing that we know, what we are saying is that in city, so what do you think is the prognosis? I think if you look at India as a country, then in a majority of the states, infections are under control, right? Especially where there are large numbers. So Delhi, we are winning the battle slowly. In Mumbai, we are winning the battle slowly. In Gujarat, we are winning the battle slowly. Chennai, we are winning the battle slowly. In Tamil Nadu, we are winning the battle slowly. But it will always be a slow battle, slow win, because the scale of the problem is huge. And the essential pandemic is essentially urban. And it has to do with the kind of housing and the kind of urban overcrowding that we have, and therefore numbers are bound to be very large. And if the base is very large, then of course, even if we have percentage decreases, percentage growth rates decrease, the absolute numbers are going to be very high. So even if Mr. Ambani's salary falls from, instead of getting a 10% increment, he only gets a 2% increment. His payslip will be much bigger than my payslip, right? Okay, so it's just that kind of a situation. We have a lot of cases, a lot of people staying in cities, so cities are going to come under control, going to take time. Within cities, slum areas will become normal much faster. Urban areas, non-slum areas, housing societies, etc., will continue to have low levels of infectivity for a longer time, and therefore all of us will have to be very careful for a long time. Wash our hands, not meet people, social distancing, etc., will have to be daily it'll have to be the new normal. As far as the country is concerned, I think the current problem states will be under control, but new problems will emerge in the rural areas of the poorer districts of the poorer states, which are now receiving a lot of migrants. So Himachal Pradesh will be a problem. Say Uttarakhand is now showing a problem. Odisha will be a States like Odisha will be a problem. UP, Bihar, poorer districts of UP, Bihar, poorer districts of even wealthier states like Karnataka will be a problem. So for a long time, I think that what's will happen in the rural areas will now in the cities will now be a challenge, because unfortunately in the cities, when we made that prediction in the middle of April, most of the infections were in cities, and if they're in cities, then cities do have better fiscal capacity, better management infrastructure to deal with the pandemic. But some remote district in a poor state, doesn't really have that kind of infrastructure at the state level, neither necessarily the administrative machinery to deal with the issue, and therefore situations become rather difficult. In fact, if you look at our index of immobility, we find that it is typically larger the city states, right, like Chandigarh, like Delhi, right, which have been able to impose immobility rules much more strictly than states like poorer states like Bihar and Odisha, where the imposition has been lax. So we know that there are new problems, but the location of the new problems will change. Now, what are the caveats? We have some caveats here. One is we are working with the data which is provided by the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Family Health and Family Welfare and Health, which is there on Arogya Setu every day. So that is the only data that is on case loads that we have. So daily cumulative cases, daily recoveries, daily deaths, and so on. That's the kind of data that we are using, and our results are only as good as that data are, right? So that's what we. Or what is the policy conclusion? One is, of course, everybody is talking about better public health. That's important, but we also need to look at our urban housing sector. For example, in Mumbai, the mean income, household income is 2,50,000 rupees, but the price of a house is about 1 crore, right? So we need to actually see why are houses so unaffordable in cities, which forces people to stay in highly overcrowded, unhygienic environments, where we do not provide enough public utilities like clean drinking water, enough toilets, which are sitting tinder boxes for infections, right? So far, these urban informal settlements have been hotbeds of infection. For example, the M East ward in Mumbai has the highest percentage of non-drug resistant tuberculosis. But most of these infection diseases had a system where they did not put the same kind of pressure on the health system that being put now, and also that did not reach the middle class and the upper middle classes who are normally isolated from these infections. The first time that everybody is brought on par, right? The person living in slums is as affected as I am, and I've had the same impact as my activities have been stopped and my income sources have dried up and there's nothing to do, right? So I think it's the first time that we all of us have been affected, and we are even thinking about what are the conditions in slum housing and so on. But we need to look at the housing policies, public health. We also need to have better public communication immediately. Now, if you look at the cases in Maharashtra, I have not put the graphs here, but I know for sure that the recovery rates in Maharashtra are improving, right? Recovery rates are higher than death rates. Number of recoveries is more than deaths. Currently, we have about 35,000 people who are active cases, out of which about 10% are hospitalized. So 3,500 is what hospitalization is, right? Okay. So it's not that it's a situation which is completely out of hand. So I think public communication has to be maintained, and only ultimately it's the communities which are fighting, right? As you can see, whatever laws the government can have in place, it's ultimately up to people to stay at home or to travel or not travel at all. And if things can be communicated to people through effective channels, that look here, staying at home is difficult. I know it's difficult, but we are winning the battle. This is going to end after some days. Please cooperate for some more time. This kind of communication, what's happening on a day-to-day basis, I think that public communication channels have unfortunately not been put in place in many places, including Maharashtra. So that's really something that that gap needs to be covered. Finally, we also need much better data management. Like, for example, if you look at Maharashtra government has started a dashboard but that dashboard gives you some data on, so it gives you a picture of how the cases have been evolving. There's a red line for deaths, green line for it. But it doesn't tell you, for example, that, how are the recoveries and deaths moving related to each other? That's the question that people want to ask. Or there's a lot of granular data that we want. right? We want to, for example, I'm trying desperately to see relationship between modeling the probability of death as a function of comorbidities, ages, so we get a better handle on who are the people who are likely to die. We can tailor policies better, but that kind of data is simply not available. We also need data on, for example, infectious disease. Data. We require data on what are the incubation periods. What are the serial intervals? COVID has a peculiar point in serial interval. What's a serial interval? The serial interval is the time between first infection and the first reinfection. Whereas the incubation period is the time from the infection to the time at which symptoms show. Now, in whatever data we have in China, etc., shows that the serial interval is less for COVID than the incubation period. So that means that if you have an asymptomatic person, you might infect a lot of others even before symptoms show up for you, right? Okay. So that's something in China. But recently, the government of my India Health Minister of Health said that people who are asymptomatic don't seem to infect, which would mean that the serial period must begin only after the incubation period. So we need to, but we don't know. We need to actually have granular data, we need to have data-driven policy making. Unfortunately, that is not really happening. If you look at, for example, what the medical education department brings out a bulletin every day on MEDD bulletin. It's impossible to read that bulletin and make sense of that bulletin. Now, even the numbers are given in such a bad and a tangled fashion that nobody can actually make much sense of that. That is not the way you want to communicate with people in the case of such a large public emergency. Because ultimately, till you involve people properly, and make people party to your decisions, this something at this scale will not succeed. You need better public communication and much better data management, right? I think those are big gaps which nobody is looking at. I've been trying very hard to convince the Maharashtra government to actually do better data management, but so far they're turning a deaf ear. Hope they listen sometime. So thank you very much. This is what I wanted to say. Now I can take questions.
Yes, this has been through and through, like so many of dimensions involved, and there is a lot of complexity and uncertainty. And anyone who has joined us, they can realize the amount of hard work it has taken to put all these things together and present it. And so I'm really grateful to you. Have been speaking for the past 1 hour. So I would rather say that we take comments from Deshpande sir and let you rest for at least 5 minutes or something.
No, it's okay. I can take question.
Because you have been speaking for so long. Deshpande sir.
Neeraj, it was really a wonderful presentation and really painstaking, and you have made it so clear that what is happening country across in various states, and how we have succeeded in controlling problems in some of the states. So it was quite clear from your presentation. And there are certain issues also which have come up and emerged out of your discussion. That one comment which I feel is very important, that is fear and panic, which you talked about, that could be even more dangerous than virus itself.
Absolutely.
And therefore there has to be proper communication, and that communication would help. See, the present situation, we are in what we can call it as a emotional contingent kind of thing, apart from your code. And therefore, we are catching emotions from one another. And uh, controlling that virus is also equally important.
Absolutely.
So you talked about social distancing, and what happens in the period of such kind of crisis, that we need for connections when things are going badly. So physical distancing, that is what we are trying to maintain. Instinctively, we want to come together in such situation.
Absolutely.
And therefore, isolation, which we are talking about, that isolation does not necessarily translate to loneliness. And therefore, such kinds of programs would help us to understand. So, but of course, you need to be careful. You need to make sure that you don't fall in loneliness, and other people should also not feel lonely. And therefore that kind of positive mood, it will lead to better decision
That's
making.
right.
And what role policymakers can play, what role academicians like you are playing. And it is really motivating for all of us that what work can be done during the period of crisis, and how we can bring the factual information in front of the society, so that society would come to know the problem in a better manner, and there will be better understanding of the situation. Because many a times you get information which may not be correct, but ultimately facts and figures would indicate what is actually going on in the system. So thank you so much. Thank you for spending your time and showing us what is happening across the country and in various states. So there were a lot of confusion related.
Hello.
Deshpande sir, your voice freezed. I think. कोई बात नहीं, आप can continue. He'll join us soon.
Sure.
Yeah, Deshpande sir, you're there with us? Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yeah, please continue.
So this is what I want to say. And there are certain questions I think that we should take fast, because there are some interesting questions raised by our students.
Yeah.
You must have tired 1.5 hours.
No problem. No problem, sir.
That is
I'm
the
here.
amount of hard work. Like after such a exhaustive presentation,
dear.
speaking for the last 1 hour more,
No
that
problem.
is the amount of investment. Thank you so much. So there are people thanking you first and foremost, I want to tell. And Dr. Srihari sir had to leave for a medical appointment. I hope he's fine. And
Sure.
he said that it's a very informative presentation. So moving towards the question. And I'll just summarize the question, because most of them. Okay, so there is a question, and Deshpande has already put it that. What about the shape of the curve relating to the recovery of economy? Now we're talking about the recovery of economy.
Now, you don't know, because you see, now we don't know how this virus is going to affect rural areas, for example. Right? So it's now we know that it's spreading in UP, that is spreading in Bihar, could be spreading in Odisha. And it could be spreading in the agriculture. So we don't know how it will be controlled. If it spreads in the agricultural season, then that might be a problem. This might be more complicated now with other factors, like, for example, there is a locust raid in large parts of Punjab and UP. So we don't know how we're going to deal with that given the pandemic. We have just seen a cyclone in Odisha and West Bengal. So I am not. So I think it all depends on how the virus moves in the rural areas. I think in urban areas it will take a long time for the economy to revive, because businesses have been shut for 2-3 months. We have no idea. This is something that we could never have even dreamt of. Well, it's a huge shock to the economy. Clearly, the economy will contract in the next 1 or 2 quarters. It not show, and I think it will be a long drive, because even when we are really trying to put in liquidity, RBI has made a lot of efforts to put in liquidity into the economy. We still don't know whether demand will increase fast enough for that liquidity to translate into investment by people, whether the people will be willing to borrow from banks, even if banks have the resources, or whether banks will be willing to take the risk of giving money to people. Secondly, there is this whole unorganized sector, unregistered businesses who don't have liquidity. So I don't know how they will access issues, whether workers will come back to cities. So cities' economies will, activities like construction will be impacted for a significant time in urban areas. The unorganized sector, labor, construction activities, etc., will definitely take a long haul to come back. We're trying to start aviation and other industries, but that's a good move, because I think faster the better, more carefully, more calibrated the better. So that's already happening, but I don't know what will happen to rural areas. So we don't know how long this issue will continue. So at the moment, all that I can say is that there's a huge impact on output. I don't know when the recovery or what kind of a shape the recovery will take. It's a bit too early to say.
Yes, we also have Dr. Manish Chava joining us, and he has put a question like it's in relation that the microeconomic impact on the nation, the impact on the microeconomy of the nation, and what do you think that do you think is the best possible time to execute Gandhiji's ideology of strengthening the villages, making them self-reliant?
The villages have to be self-reliant in any way, but the problem is, villages, we have to, of course, if we can have a way in which we can raise resources at the local level and make villages as much able to use their local resources as productively as possible, will surely benefit for not only for this crisis, but in general, then cities will not be overcrowded, local resources, local levels of prosperity will increase, and so on. But I don't know how much, because also our patterns of development in a larger globalized world have been largely urban based and urban centric. So it is cities which are growing, right? Cities which are growing. We are one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and the economies of the cities are growing much faster than that of urban area, rural areas. So, for example, the population of Maharashtra from 2000, has rural population of Maharashtra almost stagnated, whereas urban population of Maharashtra has grown much faster. So I think people want to live in cities. People want to live in cities for a lot of benefits which cities give, and given that, uh, you know, just making villages self-reliant won't work, because you need to provide the same kind of aspirational structures and markers of modernity that you find in towns, in large cities, that you don't have them in villages. For example, the mall is a big marker of modernity. I come to a rural area, from a rural area to an urban area. I start working, I become a plumber or something, I get some money. I take my family to a mall, buy something. I send my children to English medium schools.
Yeah.
It's that kind of a modernity transformation, which is unfortunately, I don't know how we can do that in rural areas just by making them self-sustained.
Mhm. So do you think, sir, that this thing has been enough of a jolt for the entire world and India specifically to to change their priorities in terms of healthcare sector, investing more in healthcare industry and city planning, and more on research driven, research driven projects and areas like that which have been otherwise neglected or less focused on?
Yeah, I'm hoping that, I think it should. That's what we should be able to. That's what we should learn from this. But do we actually learn is another question. Will we actually
That's
learn is another question. For example, this is a time when we can reinvent our public health priority. We can say, look here, we're going to look at Kerala. Kerala has had a good public health system, and therefore they could control the pandemic. So let us now put in place a good public health system. Let's pay more attention to how we plan our city. Let's say what are the patterns of economic development. For example, South Korea has said that in their recovery, when business have stopped, they're not going to support polluting businesses. Right? They said they're only now going to give public subsidies only to green businesses. Right? They said, why should we give public money to people who spoil the environment? So I think we should learn to take those leaves, but I don't think we're being able to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion going on when it comes to the migrant workers, and they're just there on the news. So I'll just sum up this question: that this lockdown, and we are opening up of the states or opening up of the cities, the creating crowded situation or something like that. So and the migrants being allowed to go to their native places. So, what do you see as a specific kind of relationship between migrants, the scenario of the migrants moving on here and there, and the rising number of cases? And do you think it was a good decision to allow them to move?
You see, there is clear relationship between migrants going back and spread of infections in rural areas in
Yes,
states. You have seen that in
it
the
is.
picture.
Yeah.
So I think what we should have done, I think, see, this is a huge decision. So I think and ultimately, if I were a migrant in a city, I actually written a small paper which is there under review in the EPW, which says that if I were in a city and if I'm on a hotbed of a slum where infections are spreading widely, where I stay in small houses, I can't do social distancing, I would figure out that I'm very likely to get infected, and I would like to go away from the infection to home. That's where
Yes.
people are, my family are, that's where I feel safe. So it's a perfectly rational decision for anybody wanting to go back home to actually try and get back home. I think we should have anticipated this. We should have
Okay.
anticipated this, which we didn't. Okay, and we should have actually prepared for people moving back. Right. So we should actually have, before we went into a complete lockdown, we should have gone into a little bit of a calibrated lockdown, maybe a few days, but maybe made the same kind of efforts that we are making to shift people now after they're infected. The same kind of efforts, the same level of efforts you could have made by shifting people before they were infected. The same Shramik trains, etc., could have gone. The same number of people could have been shifted, but before they were infected. So I think that unfortunately that was missed out the plan. The second thing is, when once you have people here, then you need to look after them,
Yeah.
right? If you don't let them move, ultimately one must realize that this was different from the usual relief rehabilitation efforts of the government. Relief rehabilitation happens because there is a cyclone or something happened in nature. This was something which has happened not because of nature, but because of a certain decision which the government has taken.
Hmm.
I can't go to work not because Mumbai is flooded, it's because I can't. The government has said I can't go to work, right? So it becomes even more imperative for the government to actually bear the responsibility of keeping people where they are, looking after them. And I think we had resources. We had enough resources. For example, if you look at the Food Corporation of India, we have enough resources to give about 10 kilograms of food grains per family for 3 months now, right? Or we should have put more fiscal resources, keeping people where they are. Also, better and better communication. A lot of communication was required for people who are in the farm sector, because बहुत लोग बहुत ज़्यादा डरे हुए हैं. So you should also have been able to explain to people कि ये छूत की बीमारी नहीं है, इससे तुम मर ही जाओगे, ऐसे नहीं है. अगर चलते जा रहे हो अपनी बीवी को लेके, 5 साल के बच्चे को, 3 साल के बच्चे को लेके मुंबई से यूपी चलते जाओगे, उससे अच्छा यहीं रहो, यहीं सेफ रहोगे. Yet this kind of communication from an authoritative channel didn't happen. And I think panic is a very, very, very serious. People worry, and I would be worried if I were in a small house somewhere in Kalina where there is somebody next door has been infected and 10 घर पीछे छोड़ के कोई मर गया, तो I would surely be worried. So I think regular communication with the community was also. So we should have looked after people. We should have first anticipated this. Or जो जाना चाहते थे, we would have sent them back. Then those who remain, we should have looked after them. We should have communicated to them properly. But that unfortunately didn't happen.
Yes, yes. Just summing up with two questions. So when it comes to, like, we have the kind of best performing states or the worst hit or worst performing states, do you think the learnings can be implemented? Because there is a lot of dynamics involved. Each state has its own identity and its own dynamics, and many factors coming into play. So can we transfer the resources or transfer the learnings or anything like that?
That's it. I think obviously we have a lot to learn from Kerala. We need to know how Punjab has handled this. And I think there are lots of learnings from places like Delhi or Mumbai, which have had the toughest of the fights. I think you will get a lot of learnings where the fights have been really tough. In Kerala had the experience of dealing with the Nipah virus. They were proactive. So all those things are obviously there. But what happens in cases where those things are not there, where you don't have the institutional capacity, where you're not prepared, where you're not prepared? How do you fight it out? What kind of things you do, and what kind of things work, and what kind of things don't work? So there's a lot of responses that will also, a lot of learning that we'll also have from cities like Mumbai or Delhi, where we really have had tough fights.
Yes. So the last question I want to ask is that the amount of hard work that you have put in, and so there is a lot of multi-dimensionality and many aspects involved. So you also need to consider human beings, and you also need to consider a virus, its own life cycle, and the way it multiplies itself. We need to consider psychology, economy, biology, and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how were you able to actually accommodate and consolidate all such dimensions and bring this kind of presentation and this kind of study? Where how
Look,
difficult
I
it was,
started
or
with a different
what
assumption.
was the approach?
So initially, you had all kinds of epidemiological models making forecasts of how viruses were working. So I said, as an economist, my perspective should be a little bit different. For an epidemiologist, it is about making projections to manage the medical workload. So they can say how the virus will eventually evolve and what kind of loads will happen on the medical facilities and what kind of pressures that there will be. Whereas our focus is to be different. Our focus is not understanding the virus, but their job is to professionally understand the virus. Our job is to professionally understand people. So somebody has to bring a different perspective of professionally understanding people. See, look here. Suppose you have somebody who's seriously ill with cancer, right? Fighting cancer. So it is the fight is as much in the body as in the mind. And a good doctor will be somebody who just doesn't understand medicine, but who also understands people. You need doctors who understand people, who understand that person, who will sort of be able to deal with. So basically, I thought let's try to bring in some insights from India. But you can't do that without understanding some basics of epidemiology. And they're very easy to learn, right? Very basic biology, very basic epidemiology is involved here. And fortunately, what happened was when I use open source programming languages like R, R, for example, in just 3 weeks, there's about 50 different resources for dealing with COVID virus itself. So R has codes where the data gets uploaded from anywhere in the world, gets analyzed, results get printed, and so on. So there are already these open source resources, right, which we have to be able to use. So there is a lot of new data coming up, getting all those data sources together, getting some learnings from epidemiology and some understanding as an economist is what I've been able to do this. And of course, cooperation of a lot of my students and friends who actually are working in the background. The computation which I showed you was only 50% of the computation which we do every day. And what I showed you just takes about 9 to 10 hours of computing. Right? For example, we generate forecasts for every state, every country in the world. For every state, if you think of Maharashtra, for example, what we'll do is we'll generate 1,000 simulations for the data on Maharashtra every day. For each of these simulations, we fit about 20 time series models. So there will be 20,000 models fit for every day for Maharashtra. For each of these 20 models, for each of the replications, we'll generate the best forecast, right? So we'll forecast and we'll generate out of these 20 different models, the best forecast. Then we'll average out this 1,000 forecast for Maharashtra every day and get a forecast which gives you about 97-98% accuracy. This is done for every district, every state, and very large countries. So, for example, for states alone, we run something like 400,000 models every day. Right? Time series models are estimated every day. So look at that, and that can't be done by me alone. That's because I have a team of people. Now today we're actually developing a corona tracker, where at the bit of information, anybody will be able to get all this information at any point of time. So all this misinformation that's happening and the panic that's happening is going out. So our objective is really to try and put in the public domain clear information, which will help people understand the situation that they are in. Rather than publishing papers or doing anything of that kind of it now.
Just look, sir. I mean, I see that you talk about data management also, and it feels like there is lots of conclusions and lots of learnings that will happen post-COVID, because that way we'll have that much amount of data with us to actually, make solid comments on. So lots of people thanking you actually on the chat box because they can't unmute themselves, and especially on their behalf, I really would like to thank you. Bhavesh sir is facing some technical issues. I've asked him to send his questions or comments through WhatsApp, so we'll see what he has to say.
Sure.
But and thank you so much for taking time out. I hope you're doing well.
And you can share the presentation with anybody who's interested.
I'll surely. And this is being uploaded on YouTube also. It's available on YouTube, so people can watch from there also. I guess we should wrap this up. You have been tired by us, and thank you so much for this much of time. Exhaustive on a lecture. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much again, and thank you so much for the joinees who have joined us. And I think Bhavesh sir is typing something. So shall I wait, sir, for 2 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. No problem.
Yeah, we're waiting for him. I think he has something to say. There's a bit of problem, so joining up by is writing something now.
And you can see how Ashmat, our students can understand the importance of data and the way of presentation of data.
Yes.
And you can do good amount of work jointly because it requires mathematical background, and majority of the students are from engineering background, so they can very well understand the intricacies of this whole presentation and the technique involved in it.
Yeah, the
And Dr.
intricacies.
Neeraj Hatekar is always keen to make you understand the software which he has developed himself, and he is making use of it quite extensively. And he always feels happy to share. That is the best part of Dr. Hatekar.
Yeah, like
Whatever work he does, he immediately sends it, and that is, I think, quite a rare quality.
yeah, I mean that it's very much visible in the way he presented for almost 1.5 hours. It's like a rare scene. So I mean that's really commendable, and it's really fortunate of us. And we must thank, in a sense, you, sir, Deshmani sir. We must thank, because it had not been possible without you. You have been the binding force, as I always say, keep saying it. And the students who join us, and all the attendees who have joined and have kept and they're glued till now. YouTube में भी काफी लोग are watching. So like that. So I think, Bhavesh sir, I think we need to wrap this, I guess.
Okay.
So we'll see maybe sometime then. Thank you so much, Neeraj sir.
Thank you.
And we wish to meet you soon once this ends.
Sure, absolutely.
Come to Nagpur.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you.
He comes actually regularly.
I come very often.
He does come. Oh.